Okay, let me make sure. Yes. Recording is working correctly. Okay, how are we doing today? A very weak thumbs up, some nods yes. How did the physics exam go? So, oh, I'm sorry. Other folks, how are midterms going? Later today? What is it later today? Say again? Oh, okay. I actually love linear algebra. Linear algebra, I became a math major because I love linear algebra so much. And then it was the first class I taught when I taught my own classes. This is back when I was a mathematician. And yeah, students didn't like it either. Other midterms happening like this week?
Friday.
On Friday? What's on Friday?
ESS, Sustainability Science.
Oh, interesting, cool. Other things going on? Any good things? Sahana.
I was feeling jet lagged last night.
Okay.
And I went to bed when I started to feel sleepy, and I feel much better now.
Good. You get like 12 hours of sleep or something?
Like 10 and a half.
I remember when I used to be able to get sleep like that. It really, really goes away later in life. So cherish your ability to sleep for like 10 hours at a stretch right now. Okay. So first, some reminders. Difficult conversation number 1, due this Friday. As we talked about last week, I'm hesitant to push this one back, but we can if it seems like you need it, especially since there's going to be a whole second slide here about finding arguments. A lot of groups are having trouble with that. So if we need to push difficult conversation number 1 back, we can. I just prefer not to. A reminder to finish the Unit 1 quizzes, those 2 individual assignments on premise conclusion form and argument maps. Finish those up if you still need to. I think there's something like 5 or 7 people who haven't finished those yet. And like I said last Thursday, it's not like an emergency. You need to get those done right away. But you'll want to make sure, you'll want to try to do those this week so that you can be sure that you've finished with them next week when we finish the new unit we're starting today. And then an announcement rather than a reminder. Last week, when we were having this debate over whether or not there are any acceptable uses for AI, someone introduced a sort of meta-argument or a more, let's say, philosophical position that I oversimplified as the idea that morality is just a matter of personal judgment, and so like everyone should decide for themselves how they weighted, for example, moral arguments about the environmental impacts of AI. And I had a little argument towards the end of that this kind of view that morality is just a matter of personal judgment can lead to social problems. And then coincidentally, on my social media over the weekend, I came across this very interesting essay on The Conversation about the idea of rebellion against moralizing, which seemed highly relevant. So I just thought I would share that with you all as something interesting, kind of relevant to class. Okay, any questions about assignments other than finding arguments? Again, we're going to talk about that a bunch on the next slide because there's some serious issues there. But any questions about assignments other than finding arguments? Okay, so Talking about finding arguments. I received, I think it was 6 emails over the weekend and yesterday from various people, either individually or on behalf of groups, talking about issues that basically indicate like general teamwork failures of various kinds. Okay. So I wanted to go over sort of some basic ideas of teamwork that hopefully will help you all kind of recover from these meltdowns. When you're establishing a team, whether this is a kind of long-term thing, so for example, I'm chair of the philosophy department, we are a team in sort of figuring out the curriculum and how we're designing our programs and stuff like that, even though we're responsible for our individual classes. Or if you're working on a team for an individual group project. One of the first things, 2 really essential things that you need to do from the very beginning is to establish some group infrastructure and choose a lead. So establish the infrastructure means that you need to figure out where and how you'll communicate between meetings and how you'll combine the work that you're doing separately. Okay? So for finding arguments, I gave you a Google Doc, said copy this Google Doc. And at least in some groups, what seems to have happened is there wasn't agreement on how to combine the work you're doing separately. And so like 2 or 3 different people within the group had their own copy of the Google Doc that they were working on. And then 1 or 2 people turned in their version. And because of the way CAT Courses works, this showed up as a submission for everyone. Okay. So there was a lack of agreement on this critical piece of infrastructure, how you were going to combine the work that you were doing separately. And I'm guessing some of that was related to a lack of infrastructure for how you're going to communicate between meetings. So in theory, these are study groups that were set up a month ago, more than a month ago now. And we encourage you to meet regularly and to have ways to coordinate with each other when these kinds of group projects came along later. Okay? It seems like at least several groups didn't really do this. And so this is something that you need to kind of sort out now. You didn't really establish good communications infrastructure with the result that you all couldn't coordinate among yourselves over the last week or so. And as a result, people kind of went off and tried to do their own thing and resulted in the problems we have now. Okay, so one crucial thing is to establish infrastructure for how you're going to communicate with each other and combine the work that you're doing separately. The other really important thing is to choose a lead for the group. This is not a boss. This is not someone who is in charge and giving orders. The role of the lead is to help everyone remember what it is they're supposed to be doing, and sort of, if things get off the rails or look like they're going to get off the rails, pull things back. So the lead is responsible for things like scheduling and facilitating the meetings of the group, not running the meetings, but hey, we're here to work on this assignment together. Maybe we need to figure out how we're going to divide up the work or something like that. Make sure everyone understands their contribution. You don't want a meeting to end with, oh yeah, we're going to work on this project, but no one actually knows what they're going to do, because then nothing happens. Follows up when members flake or ghost. That could be following up with the member of the group. It could also be following up with me or Polyphony, right? So if you hadn't been able to contact a member of your group in a week, that should have been something that you brought to me sooner than the day before the assignment was due. And the lead can also be the one person responsible for turning in the final product. So the lead can make sure everyone contributed to this. This is finished. We've done all of the things that we need to do. It's ready to go, rather than 2 or 3 different people submitting things on behalf of the whole group. And then we get a bunch of chaos in CAT Courses. Okay, are there any questions about these 2 aspects of establishing a functional team? Okay, so at the bottom of this slide, I have a link to where you can see all the study groups. You should be able to see these in here. So you can check to see who exactly is in your group. These are based on the study groups that you formed in discussion sections. So this is what I've got from Polyphony. If this differs radically from who you think is in your study group, you should talk to Polyphony, you should talk to me right away so we can get that membership sorted out. Okay. So you need to check who actually is in your study group because at least one group was confused about that. You need to have a meeting where you're going to decide how to combine the different assignments, the different versions of this assignment that different people have prepared. And then, once you have had that meeting, you figured that out, you have one Google Doc for the group that has the 3 arguments you're going to actually turn in for the group, contact me, and I will make sure that I understand, sort of separately from CAT courses, because it's limited in certain ways, I can make sure I understand who actually contributed to this thing, and so who is responsible for this. Okay. If you did all of this, I think there was at least one group that seems to have done everything and done it well. And then there were substantive issues with the argument reconstructions. And I made some recommendations. You need to change this and that. And gave a low grade, a 0 or a 1, where it needs to be 2 out of 3 to be acceptable. Remember, for this class, these assignments are revise and resubmit until they're good enough to move forward, okay? So take the feedback, make those revisions, let me know, and I'll take another look at it, and hopefully those issues have been resolved, and you can get the credit that you need to move on. Your grade is not based on a score, a number of points you got out of a total points or anything like that. It's based on completing these assignments satisfactorily. Okay, so getting a 0 or 1 on your first shot is not an issue. Ruby, you've had your hand up. Yes. Probably. If I gave you a score rather than just leaving the comments, and your group actually did this as a group assignment, then you should be good to go. If any part of that wasn't applicable to your group, then you should probably let me know when you're ready for me to look at it. Other questions? Okay. Hopefully, very good. We're going to leave the deadlines for this as they are. So I encourage you to try to meet with your groups to sort out what's up with your group sooner rather than later, like today or tomorrow. If it turns out that you're going to need more time because, say, you have midterms and people are too busy this week, we can bump it back another week, okay? High school teachers and college professors like to tell stories about what real jobs are like. These are often lies. Deadlines are a lie. I spent 2 years working in the federal government, and you would think the federal government is super strict about deadlines. No. Deadlines are a lie. I mean, not totally. You have to pay your taxes on time, but in an office job, deadlines are highly flexible. Teamwork is not. You have to get good at working in teams. So that's why I'm trying to give you these tools to work with today, and I'm much more flexible about the deadlines. Okay, anything more on this? Okay, so last time we were working on developing a class LLM policy. We had started to make some good progress, and then we had a fire alarm that cut things off, 15 or 20 minutes early, and we weren't able to come back and finish that up. Thinking about that conversation, the particular issues that people had identified as being acceptable versus unacceptable, it seemed to me that a lot of the discussion was more or less in line with the current policy, sort of the default policy that I put on the syllabus at the beginning of the semester, where the key elements are points 3 and 4. You are allowed to use LLMs with work that you do not submit, which might be things like to help with note-taking. But for any submitted work, you're not allowed to use LLMs unless explicitly given permission to do so. So as a way of trying to wrap this up efficiently so we can move on to Unit 2. First, am I right in thinking that this policy is in line with the general sense of the class? Few people wanted much stronger restrictions. Couple people were considering looser restrictions, but it seemed to me like the general sense of the class was in line with this policy, allowed to use them on things that you don't submit, but for any submitted work, not allowed. Is that where people were in general? I see nods. Does anyone want to argue no? Okay. Okay. Specifically, would anyone like to propose some exceptions to point 4? Some specific ways in which you want to argue LLM use should be allowed. Jonathan?
I was going to say that unless it's required for an assignment, but that's already number 4.
Yeah. Anyone?
You've got one hand raised earlier.
Oh, Sahana.
If you've got some accessibility needs in which you might need help from an LLM.
Okay. That's an interesting one. My inclination there is to say that that can be handled as an accessibility accommodation. The way we handle other accessibility accommodations is like exceptions to policy rather than something built into the policy. But what do other folks think? Is that an exception that you want to put into your policy? Duncan?
I think it's a fairly reasonable exception, but what I'm confused by is a little bit of, I'm not certain of which accessibility issues I'm aware of that would be directly assisted by the employment of an LLM. The only one I could come up with is if somebody has something that prevents them from writing properly, or that there is some difficulty that they have with creating large volumes of text, as are often required by many submissions, in which case directing somebody else to write the text would be an accommodation. But there are other ways of doing that, like with speech-to-text software.
Yeah, so when it comes to accommodations under the Americans with Disabilities Act, very few people have the relevant expertise to really assess accurately what is and isn't necessary or supportive for a given person, given their specific combination of conditions. And so, for example, when it comes to accessibility requests in my classes, I don't ask why or how. That is not my expertise. The expertise really is with the particular person and the folks employed in student accessibility services who, at least in theory, do have some relevant expertise in assistive technologies for various kinds of conditions. I think, unfortunately, they're maybe not as great at that as they should be, but bracketing editorializing, it's not my area of competence to say, oh yes, you do or don't actually need this accommodation. So I don't want to take up the question of what kinds of conditions would benefit or require using an LLM. It's more about, am I going to put this exception explicitly into the policy? Devin.
I think it's fair as long as it's not overreaching, like, as long as it doesn't, like, detract from the assignment too much and, like,
Mhm.
the assignment's purpose, like, if the assignment is, I don't know, paraphrasing,
Uh-huh.
you could use it to help you paraphrase, like, maybe you paraphrase yourself, and then check with an LLM maybe to see what it thinks, but I don't think you should go straight to using an LLM for assistance.
So I'm thinking something like this. Unless you have an approved accommodation. That could cover particular assignments, that could cover an approach to class in general. There are options there. Before we vote on that, any other proposed exceptions? Any other exceptions people want to propose? Okay, I don't hear any other proposed exceptions. So I think we'll do this as a series of votes. First, a vote yes or no to add the approved accommodation exception. And then a vote yes or no to adopt the resulting policy. So this is kind of what like a legislature does. Like they vote on, they have the text of the bill, they vote to add amendments to the bill, and then they vote to approve the final bill. Okay? Any questions about the procedure? Okay. So, voting first to amend this draft policy to include the accommodation exception. Raise your hand if you vote yes. 2, 4, 6, 7. Okay, raise your hand if you vote no. 1. Okay. The yes, this amendment is adopted. Okay. Now, for the whole policy, to adopt the whole revised policy, as revised here, for the rest of the semester. Raise your hand if you vote yes. High, please. I need to count y'all. 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, 14, 16, 18, and no. 1. Okay. So the policy passes. Thank you for this. I will get the syllabus updated to reflect this addition. But just as a reminder, what this says is that as we've done so far, you're not allowed to use LLMs on work that you turn in with those 2 exceptions. Okay. So now we can finally get into Unit 2. The units for the rest of the course will be much smaller than our first unit. Our first unit, we needed a bunch of different basic tools. And so we had to develop all of those. We had to talk about premise conclusion form, acceptability versus support, then argument maps and objections and replies and how to find arguments. Just a lot. We needed to start building out our toolbox for analyzing arguments. The other units are going to be focused on specific kinds of arguments, and so they'll generally just be 2, maybe 3 weeks long. Okay. So, Unit 2 is about arguments by example. These are also called generalizations, or the fancy philosophy term is induction. I will often use these interchangeably, primarily because I forget. Argument by example is sort of inherited from the textbook I used to use, but I often call it induction because that's like the technical term among philosophers. So I will be using these terms interchangeably. They all mean basically the same thing. And we're going to start with an example of argument by example. So this cat here is not Jag, the black cat who lives with me now. This is Big John, who used to live with me, and then he disappeared in June 2020, which was a really shitty time for a cat to disappear. But anyways, we have this argument here. Black cats are very smart, but also naughty. Big John, who used to live with me, knew how to open cupboards and drawers and always managed to find where I was hiding the catnip. Jag is constantly figuring out new ways to escape the neighborhood and roam around the neighborhood. Let me start that sentence over. Jag is constantly figuring out new ways to escape the backyard and roam around the neighborhood. That's why he has to wear the tracking collar when he goes outside. So I don't think I've mentioned this to you all before, but you can see it in this picture here. So Jag has this little radio transceiver that he wears on his collar, and I have a little handheld thing that beeps and shows me roughly the direction he's in, so that I can use it to figure out, like, is he just hanging out in the neighbor's front yard, which is one place he often likes to go, or has he gotten over into the meadow and is like chasing birds and rabbits and isn't going to come back for a couple hours. Okay, so we have in this argument a conclusion that black cats are very small but also naughty, and this argument is supported by some particular examples. 2 cases of black cats, Big John and Jag, who are very smart, very clever at solving problems, but also very naughty. They didn't really care about the rules about like where the catnip, when cats are supposed to get catnip, and whether cats are supposed to stay in the backyard. Jasper, on the other hand, is pretty clever and doesn't realize that cats can climb a 6-foot wooden fence. So Jasper doesn't realize that he could escape the backyard very easily if he tried. Okay, the conclusions of a generalization can take 2 kinds of forms, called generics and quantified generalizations. So we have examples of what are called generics on the left. These are claims that talk about a group or a class without a, that talk about a group or a class as sort of a mass noun. Black cats are smart and naughty. UC students think UC Merced is the friendliest and most supportive campus. Rabbits are fast. Water boils at 100 degrees Celsius. Murder is wrong. These are all generic statements about classes of things. We can also have quantified generalizations that have these modifiers at the front called quantifiers that sort of scope within the group or the class that we're talking about. So all black cats are smart and naughty covers the whole class, but something like 72% of UC students think UC Merced is the friendliest campus. Sort of says there are exceptions in kind of a quantitative way. We can also have qualitative quantifiers, like most rabbits are fast, all else being equal, water boils at 100 degrees Celsius, or with few exceptions, murder is wrong. So all 10 examples on this slide are generalizations. They just take a slightly different form depending on whether they're generic statements or quantified generalizations. One thing to understand about generics in English is that they generally allow exceptions, but like a small indefinite number of exceptions. So we say things like black cats are smart and naughty, but we sort of allow that like there could be kind of a dopey dumb cat who plays by the rules. Similarly, UC students think UC Merced is the friendliest and most supportive campus. That is compatible with, I don't know, maybe UC Riverside folks thinking their campus is the friendliest and most supportive. Or even like a very strange Berkeley student who thinks that their campus is the friendliest and most supportive. Although I think like the empirical support for that is going to be pretty weak. So generics allow exceptions. They're understood as applying typically and for the most part. Okay. Just like Unit 1, where we had a series of rules, though they kind of didn't get emphasized so much. For each type of argument we're going to look at, we're going to have a series of rules that are specific to that kind of argument. If you need a quick reference for this, on the textbook, the landing page has all of these rules. Okay. Rule 1, when working with arguments by example, is that you need more than one example. I like to illustrate this with what I call an argument by anecdote. So one of my family members refuses to shop at Best Buy. About 10 years ago, they went to Best Buy. I forget what they were getting, like a new phone or something like that. They went to Best Buy, and they had a really terrible customer service experience. Like they got bad advice. They had difficulty returning the thing that they bought. It was a really bad experience. And based on this one experience, they concluded that Best Buy, now we have the generic, that Best Buy has terrible customer service. So this is an anecdote. This is their personal experience. I don't deny that they had a really bad time on their particular trip to Best Buy. But that's just one example. That's one single case. It doesn't generalize well to all of the various experiences you might have with different Best Buys in different places, staffed by different people who themselves might be having better or worse days on any particular day. I want to say that something similar can happen with restaurant and business reviews. So here are two reviews from the exact same restaurant in Merced. I believe I copied and pasted these within a couple of months of the restaurant opening. Okay, so these are from almost the same, about the same period of time from the same restaurant. On the one hand, one review says that the Mediterranean flavors were impeccable with perfectly grilled kebabs and authentic sauces, and this is a must visit for any food enthusiast. The other review says the food is not the best. The food was bland, cold, and pricey. I've been talking a lot this morning. So, in your groups, can you articulate what's gone wrong if we're just looking at one of these reviews? I like your shirt. Okay, let's come back together. What goes wrong if we just look at one review here? Duncan?
If we as outside observers only look at one review, we're only going to get part of what the experience has been at this restaurant.
Mm-hmm.
Although I will note what you've asked, which is what goes wrong for us if we only look at one review, is not the thing that our group spotted that was wrong with this.
Ah, okay. So what was it that your group spotted?
Each of these people have presumably not had the entire menu. Their reviews
Yes.
are argument by anecdote.
Uh-huh.
They only have one anecdote in them. And conversely, as you pointed out,
Mm-hmm.
it's not actually conversely. In addition, as was pointed out,
Mm-hmm.
they may have gone on different days with different chefs and different ingredients. So they're both making, the same argument by anecdote that we might be if we try to judge the restaurant based on this, without having suitable amounts of information to do so.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, good. So if we read a single review, and what was the one I wanted to focus on? The second one, the food was bland, cold, and pricey. That's a generic, right? That's making a claim not just about the particular food they had, but the food at this restaurant in general, when they only had their one particular meal. Similarly, claims about service. Do either of these say anything about service? Oh, the attentive staff in the top one, right here. Ah, okay. I thought they disagreed on the service, but no. They both say the service is good. But that is, again, based on their particular experience visiting the particular restaurant at one particular time. This is a restaurant I've been to maybe a dozen times since it's open, because there aren't many places to get Mediterranean food in Merced. And like sometimes it is just absolutely packed and the staff are super busy, and then other times I will be the only one there. And when I'm the only one there, like the owner comes around and checks on your meal and asks if you need anything, and like will give you free baba ganoush if you ask nicely. Okay. Other issues folks noted with the restaurant review examples? Mm-hmm.
The two reviews contradict each other and both provide like the same amount of evidence.
Yeah.
You can't really make a conclusion based on that.
Okay, so this is actually where I was going to go next. Looking at an individual review is an argument by anecdote. It's based on one person's experience with the particular food that they ordered, the particular staff who are working at that time, the conditions of the restaurant on that particular day. So what do we do instead of one particular review? It's not meant to be a trick question. I got these off of like Google Maps, could have gotten them off of Yelp. Devin? Yeah, we look at multiple reviews, or we look at the summary that those platforms provide. And what are we doing then? So you were arguing that, were you saying that we like shouldn't use these at all?
I think you'd have to look at more reviews to try and find like common threads.
Okay, so look at multiple reviews. We'll look at things like, oh, multiple reviews say the staff is really attentive.
Yeah, then you could.
Uh-huh. Yeah.
Just a note on
Uh-huh.
like general reviews for most places.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes negative reviews are a result of people who just go on and review bomb random places. There's been hundreds, if not thousands, of occurrences of owners responding to reviews, like saying like you weren't ever here.
Yeah.
On like a specific case of a negative review, or people getting either the wrong restaurant or the
Mhm.
wrong location of the chain. have that poor service, whereas
Mhm.
another place might. And thing about positive reviews is some restaurants buy bots that do reviews
Mhm.
on their place, so they might not be truly like positive reviews.
Yeah. So the development, Yelp kind of led the way with this. I think Google Maps has become more influential than Yelp in this respect, has led to sort of some of the problems we see with other forms of social media, where bad actors try to poison the reviews. There was a thing with Yelp like 10 years ago where they were threatening to remove positive reviews unless businesses bought like paid Yelp money, basically extorting businesses. Yeah, Devin?
I was just gonna add on to that and say that, people won't usually review something unless they feel really strongly
Mhm.
about it. And so, if you really like something,
Mhm.
you're less likely to review if you really dislike something.
Mhm.
And if you're kind of indifferent, you're just not gonna review it at all. And
Yeah.
so it can be hard to get a super accurate read,
Mhm.
but I mean, you can still get a read if there's a landslide of negative reviews to positive.
Mhm. Good. So these kinds of points are actually going to point to where we're going to end up, what we're going to be talking about probably on Thursday, which relate to how do we assess the quality of a sample that we're looking at, where this might be like reviews as a sample of people's experiences. Do they reflect actual experiences versus like bots or buying positive reviews? And how well do they represent people's experiences of like an ordinary day rather than an exceptionally good or exceptionally negative experience? Yeah, good. So these kinds of things we will have tools to articulate more clearly starting on Thursday. For now, I want to do this. Let's grab the black cats example. What I'd like you to do in groups is figure out how you would try to put this into premise conclusion form. If you actually did the reading, you know where I'm going to go next and maybe where I'm going to go after that. If you peek ahead in the slide, same thing. But I'm guessing most of you didn't do that because I think most of you don't do the reading. Let's take a few minutes at your table, talk through how would you put this into premise conclusion form, just knowing what you know right now. You're jumping ahead, Duncan. You're jumping ahead. That is the direction we're going to go, but we're not there yet. Okay, things have gotten quiet. We ready to come back? I guess yes. Okay. I want to put this in premise conclusion form. Someone walk me through, or at least get me started. Thomas, you're making eye contact. Do you want to get us started?
The second sentence would be the first point.
Good. We got one premise here. Okay. Next. Now everyone's avoiding eye contact. Oakley, you lose. Yes. Okay. And then, Devin?
That's why he asked to wear the tracksuit color when he goes outside.
Not actually a premise supporting the conclusion here.
That wouldn't get grouped with number 2.
You could group it with number 2, but it's actually just sort of like color commentary in the context of the conclusion of this argument.
The black cats are very smart, but also not.
Yes, exactly. Let's make this a little bigger. Oh, and come on, let me in. Put the therefore down here for the conclusion. Yep. Nothing complicated. So, what you have just rediscovered, reinvented, is what we call enumerative induction. So remember, induction, just the fancy philosophy term for making a generalization. Enumerative, as in an enumerated list, as in a numbered list. So in enumerative induction, we have a collection of examples or cases or observations. I'm going to use those terms pretty interchangeably. We have this collection of examples, and we just list them. Number 1 is Big John, number 2 is Jag, number 3 is Pookie, who is my brother's black cat growing up. Number 4 is Scruffy, who is this stray cat who adopted my grandmother. We list the examples out and number them, and they support the conclusion. So this is called enumerative induction, and this is the simplest way to think about trying to take a collection of examples and make a generalization out of them. This is not dissimilar to the way machine learning models, including LLMs, learn. They're given lots of cases, and the kind of software architecture is designed to try to build up generalizations specifically about predicting new cases rather than making a generalization. But roughly, very roughly, depending on what you're talking about here, the architecture is trying to get a kind of generalization that you get in the conclusion of an inductive argument. Okay. This should be straightforward, but are there any questions? Okay. The problem with enumerative induction is that it's not actually straightforward when you start trying to use it. Consider these 2 examples of enumerative induction. First, the sun came up on April 17th, 1980. Second, the sun came up on April 18th, 1980. You skip ahead about 16,000 premises. The sun came up on March 4th, 2025, and therefore the sun comes up every day. So even though these are numbered 1, 2, 3, 4, the last 2 should be like 16,000 and then 16,001. Okay, so this argument has not just 3 premises, but 16,000 premises. So we have this argument about the sun. And then we have this other argument. DJH, that's me, was alive on April 17th, 1980. I was alive on April 18th, 1980. Fast forward about 16,000 premises. I was alive on March 4th, 2025. Therefore, I'm alive every day. Or in other words, I will live forever. Okay. The first argument probably seems pretty reasonable. Maybe there's stuff about like the sun, is going to go out in billions of years, but like that's way beyond any scope that we're talking about. For sort of practical human purposes, the first argument seems great. The second argument, not. These two arguments have exactly the same structure and exactly the same number of premises. Both have about 16,000 premises. We have lots of observations supporting both of these. So, question for you to discuss in groups. Why is the left argument bad? I'm sorry, why is the left argument good and the right argument bad? How can we sort out with enumerative induction when we have a good enumerative argument versus a bad one? Question clear? There was a groan. Is that like, oh, this is a philosophical puzzle kind of groan? Or? Okay, good. I'm going to give you all 5 or 10 minutes on this, so I will turn the music back on. Okay, let's come back together. So, am I immortal, or do we have no reason to think the sun's going to come up tomorrow?
I am sooner to say that you are immortal, but
So you're going to go for I'm immortal.
yep, that seems more fun.
What did you think? How did you try to solve this? Eric.
Actually, I also think the immortal would be a reasonable choice now. But
Okay.
statistically, that's like hundreds, thousands of days in a row.
Uh-huh.
And like if we put that into stats, like the same thing happening again and again, means that has a huge probability that it's gonna happen again.
Okay. So let's say I wasn't in my mid-40s, but instead was like 100.
Then definitely the probability would go down.
Then we have like an enormous amount of evidence that I'm going to live forever.
Yeah, because we're not looking into any other information. We're just looking only at
Okay.
this stat.
So you're going to say, no, there is no problem with the right argument. The right argument, totally fine.
Yeah.
Okay. Jonathan.
I think the main problem with the second argument is that you're not using a proper event timeline for the event that you're trying to make a conclusion for, which is the lifespan of a person, which is included a max of 120. So you could have a minimum date range of 120 years
Okay.
to like conclude that evidence over. And if over that entire period
Mhm.
you're proven to be alive, then it might be more reasonable to make that conclusion even if you were alive every day.
Okay.
But with like a time frame smaller than what the event should allow for, I don't think it's a really like trustworthy conclusion.
Okay. So is the idea that we need more evidence to conclude whether or not I'm immortal?
For the particular circumstance.
Okay, so we need more evidence than just daily observations. We need more than 16,000 observations. We need something like, let's say, 80 or, no, not 80. We need like 50,000 observations. So for a solid enumerative induction, we need like 50,000 cases.
Well, I could have 86,400 cases for each second that I was alive.
Okay.
But that wouldn't prove that I live forever.
Ah.
Like how many evidence points.
So that's important. If we try to say, no, the problem with the right-hand argument is that we don't have enough observations. We need more data. Yeah. The issue isn't how many observations we have. Yeah, the issue isn't how many observations we have, because like we could slice this up even finer, like the number of seconds I've been alive rather than the number of days. If we try to say like you just need more observations, then when we go to the left-hand side, now it's like, oh, like the fact that I've seen the sun come up every day for 45 years isn't enough. I need to know what I need, like the sun to come up every day for 90 years or 120 years. If we're just trying to say, no, the problem with the right-hand argument is not enough observations, then we end up with ridiculous demands for concluding that the sun is going to come up. Does that make sense? Okay, let's go maybe Devin, and Duncan.
I was gonna kind of add on and say, I feel like, I don't know for sure, but I feel like you kind of have to statistically prove
Mm-hmm.
that you would live longer than average. Like, if we just say the average is, I don't know, 100 years, it's not, but,
Mm-hmm.
and you can statistically prove that you live over 100 years, then that's one piece of evidence. And if you live 200, that's like two pieces of evidence. I don't know if that really makes sense though. But being able to statistically live longer than that average person multiple times would be
Okay.
evidence to immortality.
Okay. Go Devin, Duncan, and then Eric.
So, just something just to go against the left side argument is
Uh-huh.
you could argue that the sun doesn't technically rise every day if you're at the poles,
Okay.
because then they don't have it, which would therefore showcase that the sun doesn't come up every day, which would go against the conclusion.
Okay. So you could try to argue, no, I'm going to reject the left side argument. I'm going to say both of these arguments are bad. And you can try to do that by saying like, oh, like it doesn't apply in Alaska. Or I was telling the group over there, I lived outside Seattle for 4 years. And so there were actually like large chunks of time where we didn't see the sun. Like in one case, my first year of undergrad, we had 100 consecutive days of rain. So we didn't see the sun for like 3 months. I mean, you could try to do that, but we want to be able to say that like the sun is going to come up tomorrow and the sun is going to come up, you know, a year from now and stuff like that. Yeah, so I think like that's part of why trying to really reject both arguments is unattractive. We want something like the conclusion on the left-hand side and not something like the conclusion on the right-hand side. We'll go Duncan and then Eric.
So, I kind of stated this when you came over to our table, but I think there is a largely incidental sleight of hand being done with the conclusions. The
Okay.
conclusion on the left is not the sun will come up tomorrow, and the conclusion on the right is not you will be alive tomorrow.
Yeah.
We have incredibly large amounts of support for both of those claims.
Okay.
Even at just 16,000 observations.
Uh-huh.
The likelihood of you dying on any one day is astoundingly low, and the likelihood of the sun vanishing on any one day is so preposterously low that it is not worth considering even in the most outlandish of scenarios. But the conclusions written specifically require an amount of evidence equal to infinity. If you are immortal, you cannot prove that by living for 1,000 years, because if you die after 1,000 years, you were not immortal.
Okay.
If the sun rises every day for 10 billion years and then goes supernova and explodes and is no longer a star,
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I guess you could argue that whatever stellar remnant is left is still rising, but that's a little pedantic. But the problem I take with these is not, there's not enough evidence. It's that there cannot be enough evidence for any conclusion that requires something to happen in perpetuity to time equivalent to infinity. You can't prove that. There is always an infinite number of tests still to be done.
Okay. What if I scope it to the time period? The sun comes up every day between April 17th, 1980 and April 17th, 2980. And we'll do the same thing on the right-hand side. Between April 17th, 1980 and April 17th, 2980. So I'm not going to live forever. I'm going to live for 1,000 years. Not strictly immortal. Well, that's a nice long time. I will get to see a lot of cool stuff. Yeah. Yeah. Oh, I'm sorry. Eric was first, and then Jack. No, you had your hand up first. You go first, Eric.
So I actually disagree with what he said.
Mm-hmm.
Because I personally view it as a closed setting. So
Okay.
not regarding all the other information that we know or anyone else know.
Uh-huh.
If we only look at the information we have right over here,
Yeah.
this basically has like an event occurring, I don't know, 10,000 times approximately.
Okay.
And for that to happen, like, I feel like that alone is a mathematical proof that we should claim this is the case. So, so my question is, are we supposed to be looking at this in a closed setting or an open setting, like where we can throw in other information?
Yeah, that is part of the challenge here. Is if we are taking a generalization, an inductive argument, what information is supposed to go in the premises? If all we have is this, then there's this question of, well, shouldn't there be, I think we could restate some of your concern as, shouldn't there be a premise that like humans are mortal, that people die, that they don't live 1,000 years? And yeah, like that's part of the problem with enumerative induction is that it doesn't give us a way to incorporate that, to think about that. Okay, I believe we have time for Jack. Okay.
So like when the sequence will end, I don't think that that method of argument can say anything like that.
Okay.
We can just talk about what happened in that time period.
So no generalization. All I can conclude is the sun comes up every day between April 17th, 1980 and March 4th, 2025. And same thing, I'm alive every day between April 17th, 1980 and March 4th, 2025. No generalization.
I think you need different premises.
We would need different premises to do that. Okay. Yeah. So I will finish up with this segue. So rather than this enumerative induction, which raises all of these sort of puzzles about, well, all we have to talk about with enumerative induction is like how many observations we have. We want to say things about like, does it actually represent the group that we're trying to talk about? We're going to be talking about statistical induction instead. So statistics was developed primarily in the 18th and 19th centuries by expanding bureaucracies to govern the emerging modern nation states. As we think about sort of nation states today, these didn't really exist prior to a few hundred years ago. These bureaucracies produced involved reports to describe what was happening in the territory governed by the state, especially interested in the population, economics and trade and military status. Because these were things describing what's happening in the state, they came to be called statistics. So that's the etymology of this term statistics, was basically government bureaucracies trying to understand what was happening in their territory. Statistics was adopted by natural scientists starting in the late 19th century, so actually the use in science is relatively recent. And the things you learn in stats courses, especially like intro to stats, if you take like Econ 10 or Psych 10, those were mostly developed in the 1900s through 1930s. So they're only about a century old, a little bit older. This is not a stats class. We're not going to be getting into the math. Instead, our approach will be to develop some of the concepts that are core to thinking about statistics. Okay? So that's what we're going to be doing in this unit, is taking some core ideas from statistics and putting in the framework of an argument in premise conclusion form. If you want to read more about the history, I recommend this book called The Taming of Chance by Ian Hacking, and I forgot, no, it's right there. Oh, we are kind of behind. That's fine. That is it for today. Good work today. Sorry I am talking so much, but there's a lot of stuff to introduce to get this unit started. For now, please do your 2-sentence paper. Have a great rest of your Tuesday and a great Wednesday, and we'll see you on Thursday.